Pete Blackshaw, Global Head of Digital at Nestle, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with my friends at the ARF.
Hi, Gayle Fuguitt, President and CEO of the Advertising Research Foundation. I'm here with Pete Blackshaw, Global Head of Digital and Social Media for Nestle. Global Nestle.
Yeah.
All right, so how many brands?
Oh, it's scary. I can't even announce. Yeah, it's reported that there's 2,000 brands.
Yeah.
I deal with about 800 brands in the context of all the social media pages
Only
and the
800.
like. But here are the interesting stats. 1.2 billion products sold every day. Probably 1,500 pieces of original content every day just distributed through social channels. And 340,000 employees. And massive amounts of online sales through some of the brands like Nespresso. So enough to keep me pretty busy.
And you're tapping, what I think is so fascinating about the approach you're taking is you're tapping the employees through this digital acceleration team, right? And so talk about that.
Yeah.
Talk about going and, this idea of internal mastery driving external mastery.
Sure.
Talk about what that means to you and how you're jump starting it within Nestle.
Well, let me start with the business ambition. The business ambition that we set a few years ago was to be the #1 FMCG player in leveraging digital and social media, now e-commerce, to build brands, improve lives, and delight consumers. And so that's a big claim. That's a big ask for a large
you put a lot of things in
150-year-old company.
Oh, by the way, surprise and delight.
So I think clearly you're going to have to preserve a lot of what's worked really well in a large company, but you also have to make some big leaps. So we asked ourselves, what are some levers that we can pull to really help us take a more discontinuous jump? And the first initiative, we created what we call digital acceleration teams. And we were kind of inspired by Silicon Valley and other innovation hubs where we just looked at these startups that could solve problems overnight or do the hackathon mentality, and we asked ourselves, could we reapply that? So our executive board approved this program where we'd take our top talent, up to 18 at a time, 8 months at a time, bring them into a startup facility right above our executive suite. And I kid you not, if you stomped on the ground, the CEO would hear it, right?
Yeah.
And they would do advanced training. They would do real-time content production. Yeah. They do internet listening at scale, but they did a lot of hackathons. And across the last few years, they've done over 200 hackathons on some pretty strategic issues. Like one of them, for example, was, could Nestle build an internal social network? Yeah. Now, if you started at the top and middle-level managers had to prove that, they'd probably make it fail. If you start with the millennials and say, make it internal social network, they'd kind of give you reason to believe that it could become a really big idea, which is precisely what they did. They looked at everything from, how to reinvent go-to-market strategy on a mobile basis in Central West Africa, with the retail field sales. They created a whole Uber of kitchens that were thinking about how do we apply sharing economy principles within Nestle. And I'll talk about some of this tomorrow. So that was the first part. And then the second one...
you're on the stage tomorrow, right?
Yeah, no, and it's a pretty interesting question. It's my favorite topic. Maybe it's a topic of a future book. But, how can a 150-year-old company act like a startup? And my answer is absolutely yes. I mean, it's not easy, but I think all large companies underestimate the degree to which they can move fast.
What are the characteristics of a startup?
Oh, I think there's a speed, there's agility, there's sense and respond, there's, not just an appreciation of data, almost like an embrace of data, signals that can inform judgment and motivate. I'm a big believer in data as energy field. A big reason why we have the DAT screens is not simply to have a passive view of data, but for the data to motivate. I think you want data to come to life. I mean, I worked at Nielsen for a while and, made a lot of good money selling reports, but I do worry that clients, and I'm in that client seat now, we only get a fraction of the value of those reports because of the way the data is packaged. And how do we use the internet, the visualization to kind of bring it to life? So I think startups kind of do that really well. And then it's that iteration process. And that's, everything doesn't have to be right. I do believe in lean startup principles, minimally viable products. Of course, all this is easier said than done. Companies have real compliance, sensitivities and obligation there, and there is a cost of failing. But I believe that in the digital world, you can create a safer context for failing fast and moving fast. And I've been really lucky to have a management that's embraced that or given us room to kind of test that proposition.
Yeah. So you've been described as a data guru and an intuitive marketer. Come on, just for a moment, be a data guru.
Okay.
Well, how do you divine intuition out of data?
Oh, it's a great point. Well, one of the big points I make to our leaders, and I don't call them digital leaders, I just call them leaders.
Yeah.
And I always emphasize that leadership today is in a world of disruption is about managing, not resolving tension. And one of my favorite tension points, I call them digital dualisms, is ROI versus intuition. And I think sometimes in large companies, we're just programmed to
get the number, right?
Yeah, give me the big numbers, do the research, do the $500,000 research study, and all that's good. You have to do it. It's almost like I'd get fired if I didn't embrace that to some extent. But what's different today in this digital and social media and even e-commerce world is that we're all running the numbers like constantly. On Facebook, on Twitter. I mean, we're becoming, and we're learning a lot. We're learning about a lot of norms and benchmarks. Like I know with absolute precision that if I post that iconic Matterhorn on my Facebook photo, I am going to get X number of engagement. If I add my son, I'm going to double it. If I add a St. Bernard dog, I'm going to get a certain amount. And if I do it at 6 a.m. versus, but you just learn a lot. And I'm trying to really help our brand builders understand that there's a power between the traditional ROI and the intuitive ROI, and I do think that startups make a certain
ROI. What is that?
I mean, it's not the absence of data, because again, I think
Keith Reinhardt said, like in our careers, Keith Reinhardt said to me one time, great advertising. It's like baseball. You can hear the crack of the bat and the ball, and like that's a great ad.
Yeah, it could be. I know it if I see it.
You look at it and you're like, okay,
I still think there's a lot of data involved. I just think it's a different way of processing the data. It's not processing the data by reading, the 100 reports from, IRI or Nielsen. I think that's important, but a lot of it is just from that relevant experience. I'll give you an example. My favorite expression is trust your inner consumer. And I repeat it to everybody, even to our top executives, because I want them to move faster. Yeah. And I know they're capable of moving faster.
Yeah. Well, because we all are consumers, right?
And most
consumers
of us get
people.
It. I mean, we have high levels of impatient for BS. We expect great service.
Yeah, exactly.
We know what makes us go to Amazon and write a great review or to write a complaint or Airbnb. Yeah. I mean, again, these are the experiential dimensions that I think we need to deploy more in our business strategy. And again, it's a balancing act. It's not one or the other. It's tension. The other one I talk about a lot is my other favorite digital dualism is integration versus stimulation. And I know you go through the same debate all the time on the ARF. Should digital be standalone or should it be integrated into everything? And the answer is yes and yes.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, of course you need to stimulate it.
Yeah.
You got to get people to wake up to the reality, and you got to move, and you got to light a fire. But of course it needs to be baked into everything.
Yes.
You talked to Tom, my boss last year.
I did.
And he's a big, he's a champion. He's the godfather of brand building the Nestle way. And that is a big reason why I went to Nestle. But I also know that to really light a digital fire into that, you've got to kind of stimulate the digital piece, and then you can really bring those traditional brand building principles to the next level.
That's exactly what we talked about last year, and he talked about the kind of, I would paraphrase, what's old is new again. Principles and the key core principles, and really hanging on to those. He gave some great examples though, because that really helps bring it to life. Talk about Pet Finder, KitKat, some of these really phenomenal successes you've had with social media across a full platform and individually.
Well, let's start at the brand level. I mean, we've got major global brands, and we're trying to figure out how do we create more attractive and rewarding experiences, and obviously digital, social media, e-commerce is an incredible canvas, and I think we're making really good progress. I like the KitKat brand in particular because I think they have a wonderfully well integrated agency model. So it's kind of end-to-end on the agency side with JWT, and they also
So they don't have different agencies for different
and I don't want to say that's bad, because we have some of the
You're doing
best,
that on some
of
other
the
brands.
best stuff comes from the long tail. So
Yeah.
it's like, I don't want to, what do they say? Sometimes the brains are in the boutiques. I don't.
Yeah.
But it really varies. But where it can take place, it's very ideal. I mean, ultimately, we want agencies that can just, look at the entire value chain of activity going on. KitKat's intriguing because they have really raised the bar of what we call moment marketing. It's not just random, think of something at the last minute. They plan, but they also know when
How
the
do they do
context
that?
emerges. Well, I think they know their brand essence. They know, they're very disciplined to brand building the Nestle way. They know their brand personality. And if you really have to have those buttoned up before you try to test a lot of things in social media.
Yeah.
And I think way too many brands kind of dive in and they erode brand.
Yeah.
Versus building brands. So I think KitKat's a good example. Like Nescafe is doing some superb work. I suspect they'll get some recognition here at Cannes. They've been testing a lot of the new ad formats from 360 to more transparency-driven initiatives where you can learn more about the coffee fields and the like. So those are like at the brand level, and I could talk forever about what's going on there. You mentioned Pet Finder. That's a big part of my remit, which is like how do we think about service layers that sit on top of the brand?
Consumer values translated into brand value, right?
No, exactly. Well, also like what is the entry point to the brand? I mean, is physical product enough in the future?
Yeah.
And I think it's a really good question for all of us to think through.
Yeah.
What I've been charged with as part of our Silicon Valley Innovation Outpost, which I manage, and all of our innovation efforts on the digital marketing side is, how do we put service on top of the brand? Now, I'll give you a good example. So Milo, I'll give an example tomorrow. Milo is kind of our Nesquik for our Asia, Africa regions, and very, very successful brand. Has had a very strong tradition in association with sporting events, marathons, karate lessons in markets like the Philippines,
So
Malaysia.
maybe chocolate milk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they have, to stay competitive, they've put a whole service layer on top of it in the form of wearables, and the form of like nutrition and activity tracker apps, and they've been very successful. It started in Vietnam, then it kind of cascaded in Malaysia. They just launched it in Australia, then the Philippines. But that's an example of a service layer where you've got the physical product, but you're also kind of adding value to the consumer through other means. And I think that's something that all of us as brand builders need to think about. It's also one reason why one of our favorite topics, listening, is so important, because that database of intentions, the online conversation can be infinitely revealing of brand value, and you can start to think about where there may be opportunities to overlay the service on top of the physical product.
Yeah, so the inside out of that, my son just became a veterinarian, and as soon as he started class, Purina reached out and said, we'll give you pet food for life.
Yeah.
Right? Built that relationship. But what's even more powerful is adopt a pet, which is what you're doing with Pet Finder, right? Is helping
it's an entry point.
Really offer for consumers that value pets and that value the environment and that care about that. And that goes all the way to, we used to study organic consumers, and they care about, animal safety, and, it's those kinds of values that you then can associate with your brand. What's it going to take to get back to ideas and creating great creative and building brands?
Well, I don't think we've abandoned any of that. I just think
it's just
the
measure
challenge
and the count.
The challenge is harder than ever,
and
because
the cost savings and productivity and
oh
those kinds
boy,
of things.
You got
right?
a lot of questions there. Where do I begin? I mean, listen, we've always believed at Nestle that big ideas undergird
because
everything.
I worked in a company like Nestle, and that's
yeah,
like that kind of
it should transcend all the all the platforms.
Partnered with Nestle.
Yeah, and so easier said than done. And I think clearly you need to have ideas that kind of amplify, that are shareable by design, that kind of work in a mobile context, that may work in a context that we still don't even understand how it's going to work. Things like live streaming. I'm sure everyone knows it's a big idea. Consumers are there, but how are we going to play a role? You could argue, and I think, to Tom's credit, my boss, he is, and we have these debates all the time. Do not forget that, the big idea is the number one thing. It kind of transcends everything. And it's easy to lose sight of that when you're the digital guy, because sometimes, for the reasons earlier, you like to test little things, but you got to keep that point whole. And I think Nescafe, KitKat, Maggi, Nespresso, Gerber. I think they all
brands.
do those really, really well.
Yeah.
They're very disciplined. So you see a lot of different things taking place on digital or e-commerce, but if you roll it back to the core, it's still that core idea.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about personal values and success. I think of you as a fearless leader. I am kind of saying, look, these times demand fearless leadership.
Yeah.
You know, you need to get out there. Where does that come from?
You know, I don't know. I mean, I have that brand of leadership where I go to work and I'm never quite sure whether I'm going to get hugged or fired, and it's one of those tension points.
I definitely love that.
I think the thrill of that of that tension is what motivates me. But sometimes it's really scary because I think leaders today have
researchers, heroes or GOAT, right? You know, we were on one side or the other.
No, researchers are in a great position now. I just think, but I think they can either shrivel up and die or kind of create tremendous value. But I think, the leaders today need to really, they need to push and they need to be, they can't be afraid to kind of ask the new questions and form the new hypothesis and manage those tensions that I mentioned earlier. I think they need to walk the talk more. I'm a big, passionate believer. I'm convinced that, there's so much more. I want to be humble because there's so much I haven't gotten done yet,
You're young.
I do believe that where I have been effective is this whole notion of I live the medium, I walk the talk. I'm doing it. It's that trust your intuition.
In social media.
And part of the way I'll try to even motivate executives is we that DAP program I mentioned earlier. They have reverse mentored over 100 senior Nestle executives.
They're tweeting and
1 hour with an executive showing them how social media internally works or Facebook. Is worth, maybe 100 Nielsen reports.
Yeah.
I don't want to push away the report, but in terms of helping them kind of get it, connect the dots, and then feel that sense of empowerment to kind of move forward. And I think that's a really, really important part of the mix.
Yeah.
And I think we need to, I think good leaders also don't throw away foundations. I gave a speech the other day and I highlighted, did you ever read Scientific Advertising? It's one of the classics, 1930.
Yeah.
Everybody's talking about A/B testing. Almost like it was just invented yesterday by the e-commerce constituency. Right. And my favorite book is Scientific Advertising.
Skinner.
These
go all
guys,
the way back.
or even or Aristotle. One of my favorite books was Aristotle's Rhetoric. He talks about ethos and pathos. We get so abstract when we talk about online conversation and having impact and influencers. And I was rereading that wonderful text, and he nailed it. Even when I talk about how to be effective with internal social media, ethos, kind of knowing your audience, your authority, and the pathos, the emotional connection.
Yes.
And I think, good leaders can also leverage old reference points.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, if you always speak to the new, you'll never get taken seriously.
I completely agree.
You almost have to remind people that you already bought into this.
Yes.
That's why I always open up with, Tom's brand building the Nestle way.
Yes.
Because it kind of reminds you've already bought into this. Now let me tell you why digital and social media and e-commerce kind of give it extra vitamins.
Yes.
It's so important to walk that balancing act.
Yeah, so we were recently in Potsdam, Germany, right? At the site of the summit. And I'm going through, and I don't think anyone realizes, and Winston Churchill gave this famous speech, and I don't think anyone really realizes or clicks now with the fact that he just lost his job. Right? He had just lost an election. And so it's exactly that.
Exactly.
But no one remembers that. What they remember was his vision and his sight into the future.
I listen
and
to
his
his speeches
vision,
all the time,
of
by the
course,
way.
and his vision for what success looks like. And that, that's that for me also that, looking back to see forward and pull yourself forward. And
well, he was a great listener. Think about how he read the signals better than anyone else.
Absolutely.
As early as 1930.
Absolutely.
He didn't need all the research firms.
Yeah.
He just, no, I'm not saying they're not important. Buy ARF. No, I'm just saying that it's a process of signal management.
Got it. I love that. That's so great. All right, any failures along the way?
Oh, tons. Oh, yeah.
How do you course correct? You have that little voice in your head that's oops.
I fail all the time on content. I was mentioning earlier. I'm a prolific publisher.
Yeah, you are.
I have to help. Not as much externally. One thing I desperately want to write another book.
You're due a book, aren't you?
No, I want to.
We're all waiting.
I know. I thought about writing one called "Hacking Nestle." I can't decide if, but that's like the title of like my speech
that might
tomorrow.
be the firing day, but
No. To Nestle's credit, they've really, created a space for innovation that I never anticipated in a large company. I got a little bit of.
I totally feel that with both you and Tom. I totally feel that.
Part of it's decentralized. What's interesting, like my P&G
very
was wonderful. I still have wonderful friends there. Still visit. A little bit more of a centralized operating model. Nestle's radically decentralized, which if you're really a disciple of the internet, that opens up a lot of possibilities because the internet is fundamentally, and social media is radically decentralized. But there's a mechanism that kind of brings it together. And what I have to do, is, Tom keeps reminding me, my job is to help markets win. Toolkits, guidance, best practices. And how do you do that with a decentralized network? So using our internal social media network. I mean, I'll do email blasts, but I hate doing that. It just feels like I'm the TV practitioner.
Yeah, I agree.
But I do put out a lot of content, and usually in video format, and then I'll kind of use a call to action to get them to the deeper stuff.
And you were talking about your 1 minute, right? You have your 1 minute.
Yeah. Like I've learned,
Talk about that.
Nothing motivates me more than the deafening sound of silence. And when I get a blank, when I put out content, I know that I failed. And I have to take a step back and say, well, what was it? Those are my employees. Why wouldn't they? I have authority. Why aren't they listening? Why aren't they liking? And there's always a good reason.
Yeah.
The wrong day part.
How do you figure
the
it out?
email is too long.
Yeah.
I didn't use a good headline. I didn't have a call to action. I didn't stroke certain people in the organization that might give it a little bit of extra love. A lot of the same rules that we apply to consumers apply to how we manage internally. That's why I say
leadership.
Internal mastery drives
That's
external
what your book
mastery.
needs to be your leadership mantra.
It could be. I don't know, but I think there's so much. I think there's a massive canvas for learning, both creative and analytical, that we can learn internally. And I think we can get much better in our assumptions. I think we can take much bigger leaps if we really leverage it. Now, you have to have the right infrastructure. Like we had to get a internal social media network, not just a clunky intranet system in place to kind of start to get those analytics that could inform that type of judgment. But and we're still in the early part of the journey, but I think there's an enormous amount of potential there.
Yeah, so these are big, iconic global brands that you're running. I think there's a perspective that women and minorities are maybe not as strongly portrayed in the media as they are in the population and in advertising. Do you have a point of view about that? And about what it might take to get a more even playing field in terms of advertising commercials and how different demographic groups are being portrayed?
Well, let me focus on the employee side. There's a report that just came out from Deloitte that related to digital and diversity. And what they found in doing just an extensive canvas of analysis across big companies is that digital is actually opening up a whole different diversity front that no one really anticipated. I'll give you a good data point. So our DAP program, we will have graduated 80 graduates. These are the high potential leaders, 80% women. Not by design, but that's kind of where the leadership current is going. Now,
so you
could almost say it's like the movement behind the movement.
I'm very focused on the next generation, lifting up the next generation.
No, I mean, it's, you've got these millennials, you've got obviously a regional diversity, and you've got a gender diversity, and that presents an opportunity. Any company that doesn't take that as an opportunity is missing something. We've got a new head of diversity that just joined us, and we've been having a lot of discussion. In fact, we've even been talking about how internal social networks is opening up a lot of possibilities and actually kind of breaking some hierarchy that typically served as a bit of a glass ceiling in large organizations.
Wow.
And I'm intrigued with these. I don't have a straight line to clear conclusions, but it's really, like listening,
they're initiatives.
It's really important to study these signals and start to develop some hypotheses, because there's absolutely no question that large companies, the ad industry has big opportunities here, and it's an important debate, and I'm glad it was triggered.
Yeah, I mean, we're counting millennials. It's like, let's portray all the differences and,
absolutely.
And the similarities.
Absolutely.
And with our best foot forward using the intuitive insights that you were speaking of earlier. All right, so you know how the ad industry goes and the social media industry. There's like, we kind of go in these words, like we got big data, we got the ecosystem, we got the programmatic, absolutely. Then we walled gardens.
Oh yeah.
All right, so bring us home with what's the word
of
the next, the next, look forward, flash forward the next 5 years. You're a forward-thinking, fearless leader.
It's leadership.
So
leadership.
It's leadership.
It's leadership. Forget the buzzwords.
I love that.
No, it's just
I
at the
love
end of the
that.
day, like good leaders can like get through the BS.
Yeah.
They understand the terminology that truly matters.
Yeah.
And they see the way forward to the prize. And that prize could be business growth, it could be diversity, it could be any number of things. But I do think we get way too enamored in the buzzwords. And I'm a walk the talk, who you call the kettle black. I am guilty of that. But I also know
you're
that
creating
you gotta,
them. That's why I asked you the question.
No, I know. I used to put those Ad Age columns called the next generation buzzwords, and there were, but that's all fun. We need to just.
Then the end of the year is which one's going to go away, right?
But and it's interesting because if you watch the videos where I describe our digital acceleration team, I don't really describe it anymore as a digital program. I refer to it as a leadership program.
Yes.
And I think we need to think about how the context of digital and social media,
Step
e-commerce,
away from
and
that.
big data, how that creates a whole new context for leadership and who leads and who doesn't in that environment. What are the critical skills that are needed? If we focus on that, we're going to move the needle.
Fabulous. Pete Blackshaw.
Great.
It was so fun to
Thanks.
spend time with you.
You bet.
So
Excellent.
happy
I'm so
can.
honored.